Voice of Sovereignty podcast, The Sovereign Spectrum, The Stolen Library, The Silver Warrior, and The Cross-Generational Forge. A full book episode. Voice of Sovereignty, Global Sovereign University. Welcome to the Voice of Sovereignty. I'm your host, and today we are doing something we don't do every episode. Today, we are going to cover an entire book, chapter by chapter, because this one deserves that treatment. The book is called The Sovereign Spectrum, written by Dr. Jean A. Constant, founder of Global Sovereign University. And I want to tell you right now, before we go a single sentence further, that this is not a self-help book. It is not a feel-good aging memoir. It is not a nostalgic lament about the good old days. It is a diagnosis. And like any good diagnosis, it names the disease before it describes the cure. The disease have two faces, and they mirror each other perfectly. On one end of the spectrum, elders being warehoused, silenced, and systematically removed from the flow of life. On the other end, young people being raised inside managed institutions, handed credentials without competence, and left without the practical knowledge they need to navigate anything real. Between those two ends of the spectrum is a stolen library, and this book is about getting it back. Let's go. Chapter 1, The Stolen Library, Unmasking the Nursing Home Mindset. The first line of this book's argument is deceptively quiet. It says, "The first theft is never loud." It doesn't kick in the door. It arrives with a clipboard, a cheerful brochure, and a soft promise that sounds like mercy. "We just want you to be safe." Dr. Constant calls that sentence the velvet rope around an entire generation. He introduces a concept called the nursing home mindset, and he is careful to define it precisely, because this is not an argument against care facilities or nurses or the reality that bodies age. The nursing home mindset is an ideology. It is the belief embedded in policy, in family culture, in medical language, and in the architecture of modern life that elders are liabilities to be managed rather than sources of knowledge to be consulted. When an elder becomes a liability, something specific happens. Their language changes. They stop being a person and become a case, a fall risk, a bed, a billing code. And once a person has been translated into administrative language, society stops hearing their native tongue, which is experience. Dr. Constant calls what follows severed lineage. Not lineage in the DNA sense, lineage in the living sense. The passing of warnings, tricks, tools, and stories from the fourth quarter of life to the first quarter. In the old model, that transfer was automatic. The young lived near the old. They watched them work, they heard them argue, they copied their hands. Wisdom was not a special seminar. It was in the air. In the modern model, he writes, we isolate the elders, and then we call the silence progress. And here's what makes this chapter cut so deep. Nobody in the story is the villain. A daughter signs the forms with shaking hands because she can't lift her father anymore. A son buys the medication organizer because he doesn't have time to drive across town every day. The staff smiles. The building is clean, the food is soft, the television is always on. Then the door closes, and inside the elder learns the new rule: do not be difficult. Dr. Constant then introduces the concept of trade math, and this is one of the most important ideas in the entire book, so pay attention. Trade math is not just arithmetic. It is the math of not getting hurt, not going broke, not getting fooled, and not wasting what you cannot afford to waste. It is measurement, estimation, calibration, risk, margin, and yield. It is knowing how long a task actually takes. It is knowing when a deal is expensive. It is the instinct that tells you a measurement is wrong before you even confirm it. And it is vanishing from circulation the same way the elders are, quietly, politely, under the banner of modernization. A teenager today may be able to solve for X on a worksheet and still be unable to read a paycheck. They can recite a formula and still have no idea why a car repair quote feels inflated. That gap is not an accident. It is what happens when we teach math as symbol manipulation instead of reality negotiation. The hidden curriculum of experience used to handle that gap. You learned it standing beside someone who had already paid for their mistakes. Don't cut that board first, an uncle would say. Palm on the wood, eyes narrowing. Measure it again. Measure it from the same end. You measure from the wrong end. You're off by a hair. Off by a hair becomes off by an inch by the time you reach the far side. And an inch is money. That is trade math. And it lived in proximity. It required the young to be near the old long enough to absorb the unspoken parts, the pauses, the double takes, the way an experienced person reads a situation before they touch it. When elders are removed from daily life, trade math is not replaced by an equivalent. It is replaced by something that looks like education on paper and behaves like abstraction. And here is the line that closes this chapter and should close every policy debate about elder care in this country. Trade math is sovereignty math. It is the math that keeps you from being dependent. It is the math that makes you hard to exploit. A system that wants compliant consumers does not need you to be competent. It needs you to be confident enough to sign and docile enough to pay. The locked library is not an empty one. The books are still there. The elders are still here. The only problem is that the door has been locked, and we have been trained to believe that what is locked away must be irrelevant. Chapter 2, Rage Against the Dying of the Light, Defining the Silver Warrior. The bad bet, Dr. Constant writes, is that an elder will accept disappearance as the price of aging. Chapter 2 names what warehousing actually does to a human being, and it does not soften the language. Warehousing is what happens when people are handled as inventory, placed in the correct building, assigned the correct wristband, charted, fed, rotated through activities, and kept from making too much trouble. The brochures call it community. The billing codes call it reimbursable. But the lived sensation inside that clean, well-lit hallway is something older and colder. You have become a unit to be processed. And then, and this is the moment the book turns from diagnosis to defiance, comes the sentence, "I'm still here." That sentence, Dr. Constant says, is not self-pity. It is the beginning of the silver outrage. It is the moment an elder recognizes that the system is not merely indifferent to them. It is structurally committed to their disappearance. Not death, disappearance, a living erasure. He walks through the architecture of that erasure with surgical precision. First, remove the elder from the household, because if they stay, the household has to slow down, and slowing down means learning something. Second, professionalize care in a way that crowds out family responsibility, so love becomes a service and the elder becomes a client. Third, medicate restlessness, because an elder who wants to build something or teach something is often treated as a problem to be settled. Fourth, strip authority, because experience carries the kind of authority that threatens systems built on compliance. Warehousing, he argues, often produces the very decline it claims to manage. The body adapts to what it is asked to do. If you ask it to do almost nothing, it begins to obey. But Chapter 2 is not only about the wound, it is about the response. The Silver Warrior is born in this chapter. Not an elder who is simply angry. Anger alone can be vented, redirected, medicated, or shamed into silence. The Silver Warrior is an elder who has converted anger into a mission. The mission begins with one decision that cannot be made for them. They must refuse to vanish. They must decide, without apology, I will be read. Chapter 3, The First Americans, Protocol Returning to the Indigenous Model. Chapter 3 reaches back before the nursing home mindset existed, to a model of intergenerational life that never required a policy document because it was simply the way things worked. Dr. Constant calls it the First Americans Protocol, the indigenous model of elder integration, where the oldest members of a community were not managed. They were consulted. They were not scheduled into activities. They were positioned at the center of decision-making. Their knowledge was not archived. It was active. In indigenous communities across North America, the elder was not removed from daily life as their bodies slowed. They were given greater authority as their experience deepened. The slowing of the body was understood to be accompanied by the maturing of judgment, and judgment was what the community ran on. Dr. Constant does not romanticize this. He does not pretend that every traditional society got everything right, but he argues that the foundational architecture, the belief that older means wiser rather than older means costlier, produced something that the modern model has eliminated entirely, a living transmission system. Knowledge moved from generation to generation, not through institutions, but through relationships, through proximity, through shared work and shared consequence. The First Americans Protocol is the antidote to the nursing home mindset because it answers the same question differently. The nursing home mindset asks, how do we manage the elder? The First Americans Protocol asks, how do we deploy the elder? Those two questions produce entirely different worlds. Chapter 4, The GSU Catalyst, Part 1, Sparking the Cross-Generational Forge. This is the hinge of the book. This is where the two ends of the spectrum, the warehoused elder and the unguided young, are brought into contact for the first time. Dr. Constant calls it the cross-generational forge. Not a program, not a curriculum. A forge, a place where raw material meets heat and pressure and comes out shaped into something useful. The GSU Catalyst is not a slogan. It is the practical architecture of what happens when a locked library meets a hungry student. When an elder's voice becomes instruction again rather than background noise. When the young person admits, even privately, I need a map, and the elder is there to provide one. He describes what this looks like at the ground level. A weekly kitchen table night where teenagers show up with real questions and real paperwork. A garage afternoon where a young person learns how tools feel in the hand. A phone call ritual where a young adult can ask, does this sound right? And receive an answer that isn't sponsored. These are not grand gestures. They are small acts with large consequences, because what they rebuild is lineage. And as lineage rebuilds, something happens inside the elder as well. The rage changes temperature. It becomes steadier, less like fire, and more like a furnace. The elder stops burning energy on the insult of being dismissed and starts using energy to produce heat for others. That is purpose. Not entertainment, not busyness. Purpose is being needed for something real. The warrior mentor archetype is fully realized in this chapter. Warrior does not mean violent. It means disciplined. A person who can hold a line when pressure arrives, stay oriented when others panic, and act without needing applause. Mentor does not mean lecturer. It means guide, someone who walks beside another person long enough for competence to stick. Put them together, and you have something the nursing home mindset never planned for. An elder whose purpose is the protection of the next generation's sovereignty. Chapter 5, The Revenue Infant. The Romanian Parallel Chapter 5 is the book's sharpest turn and one of its most uncomfortable. Dr. Constant introduces what he calls the revenue infant, the child as an economic unit rather than a human being in formation. And to make his case, he draws a parallel that initially seems startling, the Romanian orphanage system under Ceausescu. During that era, the Romanian state encouraged births, banned contraception, and then systematically underfunded the care of the children who resulted. The orphanages were not designed for child development. They were designed for containment. Children were warehoused, fed enough to survive, managed enough to be quiet, but deprived of the attachment, stimulation, and individual attention that human development requires. The result was documented extensively by developmental psychologists. Children raised in those conditions showed profound deficits in cognitive, emotional, and social development, not because of genetic difference, but because of environmental deprivation. Because containment is not the same as care. Because managing a child's physical needs while neglecting their developmental needs produces a specific and measurable kind of damage. Dr. Constant is not arguing that American schools are Romanian orphanages. He is arguing that the underlying logic, the logic of containment over development, of managing bodies over building minds, of institutional efficiency over individual flourishing, appears in softer form in systems that were never designed to transmit sovereignty. The revenue infant is the child the system needs, dependent enough to require services, compliant enough to accept them, and never quite capable enough to question the arrangement. The antidote, he argues, is not a better institution. It is the return of the elder, the warrior mentor, the living library, the person who has already paid for their mistakes and can name the receipt, and who teaches not through worksheet but through witness. Chapter 6, The Magician's Trick, Exposing the Grand Show. If Chapter 5 is the sharpest turn, Chapter 6 is the most clarifying. The magician's trick is the system's most reliable tool, the management of attention. A magician does not make things disappear. They redirect your gaze so effectively that when the object vanishes, you are looking somewhere else. You do not see the mechanism. You see the result and call it magic. Dr. Constant argues that the warehousing of elders and the managed dependency of youth are both products of this same trick. We are shown the ceremony of education and shown the comfort of elder care, and we look at those visible things and call them sufficient. We do not look at what is missing behind the curtain: the trade math, the pattern memory, the practical literacy, the emotional governance, and the cross-generational mentorship that no institution can manufacture. The grand show, he writes, is the performance of care in place of the practice of it. It is the activity board in the assisted living facility standing in for real contribution. It is the standardized test score standing in for real competence. It is the credential standing in for the capability. The magician's trick works as long as the audience never looks at the other hand. This chapter teaches you to look at the other hand. He names the specific mechanisms: language that sounds like belonging but functions like quarantine, metrics that measure compliance and call it learning, official processes that accept your input and then ignore it while creating the documentation required to prove they listened, schedules that train obedience, supervision that trains dependency, and the labeling system, the most elegant tool of all, where anyone who asks too many questions gets coded as difficult, agitated, or confused, and anything they say afterward becomes suspect. This is how a system silences people without ever telling them to shut up. It turns their voice into noise. Chapter 7, Sovereignty Through Literacy, the Ultimate Escape Plan. Chapter 7 is the turning point from exposure to construction. Dr. Constant argues that literacy, real literacy, not the performance of it, is the single most effective escape route from managed dependency. Not because reading is magic, but because the ability to decode language is the foundational tool of self-governance. Every contract, every policy, every lease, every bill, and every promise is written in language. A person who cannot fully read that language cannot fully evaluate it, and a person who cannot evaluate it must trust whoever is presenting it. Trust, without the ability to verify, is vulnerability. Sovereignty through literacy means something broader than reading comprehension. It means the ability to read a paycheck and understand what was taken before it reached your account. It means the ability to read a lease and find the trapdoors before you sign. It means the ability to read a medical bill and recognize when it does not add up. It means the ability to read a news story and notice what is missing from the second paragraph. He connects this directly to the warrior-mentor model. One of the most powerful things an elder can do is sit at a kitchen table with a young person and say, "Let's read this together, line by line, and translate the traps," not as a tutor performing a lesson, as a witness who has already been inside the traps and paid the exit fee. The GSU reedification mission lives in this chapter. Literacy is not a subject. It is the substrate of sovereignty. It is what allows a citizen to govern themselves rather than be governed by whoever controls the language they cannot decode. And here is the line that closes Chapter 7 with the weight it deserves. A population that cannot read its own contracts is a population that has already consented to everything inside them. Chapter 8, the GSU Catalyst Part 2, Sustaining the Sovereign Future. The final chapter is not a conclusion. It is a blueprint. Dr. Constant returns to the GSU Catalyst, but where Part 1 was about sparking the connection, Part 2 is about sustaining it. Because a spark that does not become a forge produces heat and nothing more. Sustaining the sovereign future requires three things, he argues. The first is infrastructure. Not institutional infrastructure, the kind that is funded, credentialed, scheduled, and eventually bureaucratized into the same system it was designed to replace. Informal infrastructure. The kitchen table, the garage, the weekly phone call. The community circle is where an elder's knowledge is not archived but deployed, where it is not applauded but used. The second is reciprocity. The warrior-mentor model fails when it becomes exploitation. An elder who gives their knowledge without receiving respect, authority, and genuine engagement is not a mentor. They are a resource being extracted. Dr. Constant is explicit about this. The young who want the library must treat it like a library, not like a decoration. Show up on time. Tell the truth. Do the work. Ask real questions. Do not ask to be saved. Ask to be taught. The third is refusal. The sustained sovereign future requires both ends of the spectrum, the elder and the young. to refuse the narrative that separation is normal, that dependency is inevitable, and that the credential is the same as the competence. The empowered elder refuses to vanish. The initiated young person refuses to remain easy to manage. Together, they become what the system never planned for, a cross-generational alliance that is hard to fog, hard to exploit, and impossible to contain behind a wristband or a worksheet. Dr. Constant ends the book not with a rallying cry, but with a quiet observation that carries more weight than a shout. He says, "The system bets that the generations will never find each other, that elders will accept being stored, and the young will accept being managed, and the distance between them will hold." He says it is a bad bet, because somewhere right now, an elder is still here, still capable, still carrying the hidden curriculum like a toolbox that never stopped being useful. And somewhere, a young person is tired of guessing and tired of being sold to, and the only thing keeping them apart is the lie that the separation is necessary. The sovereign spectrum is the map of that lie, and the GSU catalyst is the moment it stops holding. Let me bring this home. The sovereign spectrum is not primarily a book about aging. It is not primarily a book about education. It is a book about what happens to a society when it decides, for reasons of efficiency, economy, and institutional convenience, to keep its most experienced people away from its least experienced ones, and then wonders why both groups are struggling. The elders have the trade math, they have the pattern memory, they have the emotional governance, the practical literacy, and the ability to spot a scam in the first two sentences. They have lived long enough to know what costs what. The young have the hunger. They have the questions. They have, if you listen carefully, the ache of knowing something is missing, even if they can't name it yet. The system's bet is that they will never connect, that the elder will accept the schedule and the young will accept the screen, and the gap will hold. Dr. Constant is telling you in 8 chapters of clear-eyed, beautifully argued prose that you do not have to accept that bet. You can unlock the library. You can return the hidden curriculum to circulation. You can refuse the narrative that separation is safety, that a credential is the same as a competence, that an elder's highest contribution is to stay quiet, and that a young person's best option is to stay dependent. The sovereign spectrum is available now. Read it, share it, and then do something with it that the system cannot schedule, label, or manage. Pass it on. Until next time, stay sovereign. Voice of Sovereignty is a production of Global Sovereign University, Foundation for Global Instruction. EIN 39271652. Building a bridge to freedom through education, not handouts.